Hi, this is Troy Davison, creator of the PHRETS library. So let's spend a minute and talk about the new way that debugging and logging is handled within version 2 of the library. With version 2, we've introduced compatibility with PSR3. PSR3 is a suggested standard that's been created by the PHP Framework Interoperability Group, which basically defines an interface for how you can log messages at various levels. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail as we show an example. But the most popular implementation of this within PHP currently is a package by the name of Monologue. You can find it here on github.com/celdic/monologue. The easiest way to install this is using Composer by grabbing the package. In this case, we'll be using version 1.11.0. So going back into PHP Storm, what we have here is just a very basic empty file with the exception of specifically setting what our date time is in case you don't have that set within your PHP INI file. And then we're requiring the Composer autoload file. What we'll see here is within the composer.json file, we're simply including version 2 of the PHRETS library and also that specific version of Monologue. And we've already run the necessary Composer install or Composer update to pull those packages in. In order to see this in action, let's see what it looks like when we don't have this. The first part that we'll need to do is to set up a new PHRETS configuration. So we'll create a new configuration object. And we have some specific PHRETS credentials that we're going to end up using here. So we'll turn around and use these so we can actually connect to a real PHRETS server and see some of the responses that are coming back. So once we have the configuration set up, it's time to create the new session. So we'll create a new PHRETS session, we'll pass in the configuration, and then with the session created, we'll log in. And just to drive home the point and to give us an example that we can actually look at, let's go ahead and make a search request. So we're going to make a search for the property resource. We're going to search the A class using asterisks as our query here. And we're going to set some parameters here. So we're going to say that the limit is we only want 10 records at a time, and we only are interested in one particular field, which is the list_105 field. And now that we've got that done, we're also going to indicate that we're interested in the PHRETS library doing recursive searching for us so that it will automatically paginate through all the results. So with this, we have a basic PHRETS process, and this will get connected to a PHRETS server, and we'll actually interact with it and hopefully pull these records. So if we just execute this script directly, you'll see here that it'll take a second, but in the end it doesn't actually return anything because there's no debugging or logging that's enabled, and we're not specifically echoing or adding anything. So with this, we have no output and we have no way to actually see what's going on if we were trying to troubleshoot this or to see specifically what was going on. So this is where Monologue comes in and can be very handy. So after our auto load here, let's add a couple of lines here so that we can actually start using Monologue. So we're going to create an instance of a new Monologue logger, and we're just going to call this PHRETS just to give it a name. Monologue works off of a concept called handlers, and you can register one or more handlers onto your Monologue logger, and that allows it to be able to handle incoming log messages using various instructions or ways that you're interested in those being handled. So we're going to add one using push handler, and the handler that we're going to push in this case is going to be a new instance of a stream handler. Ultimately, what we're interested in doing here is having all of the log messages simply put to standard out, and we're interested in this being everything a debug level or higher. Within the PSR3 standard, it basically supports a number of levels that messages can go in. The lowest level is debug. After that's info, there's notice, warning, error, critical, alert, and emergency. And ultimately, a PSR3 compatible logger implements the PSR3 interface, which defines various methods for these. So for example, if we're interested in adding a debug message, we have a add debug method. If we want to add emergency, we have an add emergency message. So under each of these, what we're able to do is say, for example, test debug message. And we will simply exit here just to test this. So we'll run the script again. And very quickly, we'll see here that we receive some output. By default, it's going to show us the exact time that the message was shown. PHRETS here is mentioned as basically the namespace name that we've created, and then test debug message is provided. The two sets of square brackets here allow for additional context to be given. So for example, we could say key value as one example context, and simply by running this again, we'll see that Monolog was able to interpret this PHP item that was given to it so that it could be included directly within this log. So we'll get rid of this for right now. To show how the implementation of this actually works within PHRETS, once we have our session set up, what we can do is within the session we can actually set a logger. And simply by providing the Monolog logger that we've created, we can now come back and execute the same process that we had before, which will connect to the PHRETS server and will issue this search request using automatic pagination. We should see a lot more output here. Ultimately, what this has done is it has now logged that it connected to this particular PHRETS server, that there was an HTTP 200 OK response that was returned, and then we made an additional request for the search giving these various parameters. What came back from that search was that the server said that response was okay. There was one field of data that was given due to our select option. There were 26 total results that the server found that matched our search. However, because we gave a limit of 10, it only gave 10 results back. Because this is a PHRETS compliant server, it provided back an indication that even though it had given us 10 rows and that it stopped giving us rows at 10, there were additional rows for us to retrieve. And so the strategy within PHRETS is that it was going to continue pagination based on the preference that we had set. And so it indicates that here. In this case, it's showing that it has currently collected 10 records, and it issues the appropriate follow-up request back to the server with a new offset value that's given here of offset 11 so that it can retrieve the next 10 records. Again, we get a similar response back, the 200 OK, one field, 26 results still indicated as matching our search, and we have 10 results given. Again, we get max rows, 26. At this point, we've only collected 20, so it determines it needs to make the follow-up request. And then we get an additional 200 OK, one field that contains 6 results, and then in the end, we get the 26 results total. And we can prove that here by simply doing another. For example, we'll do add info. We'll say total records, and then we'll get a count off of the results. And if we run this again, this will show here are all the debug messages, and then for the PHRETS info call that was made, the total records is 26. So at this point we have a record set of 26 records that we're able to do something with. In this case up here, when we pushed the handler, we identified that we were interested in using a standard out stream, and we indicated that the log level that we were interested in was debug. If, for example, we were not interested in getting something as detailed as debug, we could raise this to a level, for example, info. And then simply by calling this process again, it will only allow info messages or higher to actually use that particular handler. So in this case, because we've said we only want info or higher, we only get info or higher. And every debug message that PHRETS is throwing that Monolog is handling for us, it won't actually end up using the stream handler's standard out that we have configured. So this is one example of a handler that Monolog supports with streams. There are a number of other handlers that Monolog supports for processing log messages and handling those log messages in a wide variety of ways. To go through some of those, the stream handler, as we used, is able to write any of the messages that are logged to any PHP supported stream. There's also a syslog handler, which allows you to write messages to a syslog. Native handler allows you to email output to yourself. There's a HipChat handler, which allows you to write messages directly to a HipChat chat room through an API. There's a New Relic handler. There's various database handlers for sending messages to Redis, MongoDB, Elasticsearch, CouchDB, and various others. And then down under special handlers and wrappers, there's a number of interesting use cases. The fingers crossed handler is an especially interesting one. As parameters, it takes a desired log level and it takes a separate handler. And essentially what it does is it will collect messages of any level. However, if a message is eventually thrown at the level that you have identified, so for example, it'll collect debug, but if you're only interested in alert or higher, if you ever have an alert or higher that's actually issued, what the fingers crossed handler will do is it will remember the previous 30 messages of any level, and it will fire a separate handler with all of those messages. So if you need a little bit of context behind what happened right before the alert, you could use the fingers crossed handler to look and basically remember the last X number of log messages that it's processed, so that you can turn around and provide yourself with context if, for example, you were going to email yourself about the error, or if there was other stack trace information that the logging messages could be included with that as well. So any of the capabilities that you would find online for how to work with Monolog, or any other tutorials about PSR3 in general and the way that you can interact with that should work just fine with the PHRETS library. You can pass that handler to the PHRETS library and it will use it, and while you continue to use it within your own code and within your own application. So that's a quick example of how the debugging has changed and the logging has changed and been improved with the newest version of the PHRETS library. So that's it for this tutorial. If there's other comments or suggestions you have for future videos or for things that you'd like to see, please leave those in the comments below.